What do we need to do to remove that barrier? How can I help you in this way? Not, we're only having sex twice a week and Bob at work, he has sex every day and what's wrong with you? And no. Don't go there. If you told yourself, okay, sex is bad and it's evil and this, even though you're saying that because you want to stay pure till marriage, but you still drag that into marriage. So you've got to turn that, this is a bad thing, and it says, oh my gosh, this is a beautiful gift God gave us. And as much as you enjoy him telling you you're beautiful, we need your affirmations.
Sex is consistently listed as one of the top struggles couples have in their marriages. Why is that? We think one reason is because it really matters. It's not only important to a marriage, but it's also a part of God's design. Healthy sex in marriage reflects God's design. It helps the marriage, but if tension creeps in instead, it will do exactly the opposite. So that's why this month on the Awesome Marriage Podcast, we're going to go deep on the topic. We get to hear from our audience and from some wise biblical voices. Because this topic is really tough for a lot of us, it's hard to talk about. So today we're coming to you humbly and prayerfully. And our goal is for you and your marriage to grow more healthy and more free around the topic of sex. So Dr. Kim, today we're going to hear from the men.
Yes.
This should be fun. So I'm going to share some of the feedback and the comments we've gotten from the husbands in the audience and ask you what you've seen in the counseling room, what your advice is in these situations.
Let's go.
All right. So we asked the husbands, what do you wish your wife knew about sex? Here is the first comment I've got for you. He wishes she knew, quote, how to do it, end quote. What is he talking about? What does he mean?
I wish I could talk to him to make sure. Because you can go a lot of different ways with that. I think if he's wanting for his wife, if he's asking, how do I have great sex with my wife? How do we make that happen both ways? I would say for me, I think the guy's got to take the lead in this. Because we've talked so much about how our wife's greatest sex organ is her mind and her emotions and her feelings. And so it really is serving her. It's learning in the sexual relationship what she likes, what she doesn't like, and then being willing to stay in her comfort zone. Because then she's not distracted about what does he want or what's he going to do or this kind of thing. Because a woman is very vulnerable in a sex relationship. The guy's usually bigger, the guy's usually stronger. And so I think we've got to make our wives feel as safe as possible. And then I think you want to do those not just for the minutes that you're in bed, in the bedroom, engaging in sex. It's the 24/7, 365 deal. So I think to take responsibility yourself, guys, of what do we need to do? And then talking with your spouse, what do you like? What don't you like? Staying in that comfort zone and being consistent just throughout the day in caring for her. And so I think if you find that, then I think your wife's going to be much more receptive to a great sexual relationship developing. And there, there may have been some things in her past. There may have been some things in your marriage in the past sexually that have caused some damage with her. And so I would say too, if you go through some of these steps that we talked about, and you still have some problem, go see a Christian counselor that deals in this area that can help you work through that. Because you can't just, if you're sitting there and just pointing the finger at her, I don't think it's ever going to get better. It's just not.
Yeah, that's a great marriage principle in general.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to look at yourself. And so it goes back, so much as Nancy and I were talking the other day about a lot of things that we do for a video we do each month for our marriage changers. And so much of it comes back to communication. It was almost every single topic. And I think it's on this, you've got to open that conversation to her. If you don't think she's doing sex right or like way you want her to, then talk about it. Talk about it with each other. And not in an accusatory way, but help me understand because I want our sex life to be better. So what can I do? What is there something that you would like me to stop doing? Is there something that you think if I did would be helpful? And get the communication going.
I think I'm so glad that you said that last part and gave us some conversation starters, because I think You've referred in the past to the fact that most couples do not discuss their sex life at all. And I think that it's a painful topic because there's a feeling of rejection on both parties, I think. And so I think it's all too easy to come at it with like, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? Which sounds very accusatory, puts the spouse immediately on the defensive. And so using those like open-ended questions, help me understand what's going on. What can I do? Do you feel safe? Do you feel heard and cherished? Like these are a lot better questions to start with than why don't you? Why aren't you? Et cetera.
Right. It seems like if couples do talk about sex, it's an argument over frequency. Mm-hmm. And we've got to get past that to the quality of the sex. Yes, frequency is important. I get that. Mm-hmm. But if you work on the quality, I think the frequency, again, will take care of itself.
And I think
it's something you both enjoy and desire.
Absolutely. The quality. And also if you work on resolving that tension of the blame, the accusation, I mean, that's just not going to make for good sex if you have that between you.
No, absolutely. It's just not, it's not going to, a woman's not going to give herself when there's that barrier there. And so we've got to, as guys, a lot of the responsibility falls on us. What do we need to do to remove that barrier? How can I help you in this way? Not, we're all having sex twice a week and Bob at work, he has sex every day. And what's wrong with you? And no, don't go there. But I know guys that have and do.
Right. Bob might not even be telling the truth. It might not be true.
Most likely, if he's like the guys that I used to listen to in the locker room in high school, upperclassmen, no, they weren't telling the truth either. And I hung on every word they said.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this kind of episode is so important, because a lot of us, we don't know where to turn for information. And inevitably, if you don't figure it out, you're going to turn somewhere you shouldn't turn. Like if you don't resolve this issue in a godly, biblically like directed way, it's going to go somewhere bad. It's going to be either like a bitterness, resentment. It's going to pile up between the spouses and push you apart. It's going to be arguments. It's going to be each spouse for themselves, pleasing themselves in some way or shutting down, whatever it is. And so I think this conversation, like, I'm glad that right off the bat, you're talking about that communication piece, because we have to learn how to have the conversations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so important. And it's not hard to do. I mean, it is and it isn't. Once you get into it, I think you'll see the value. And I know sometimes that can be awkward at first. And but it's just taking that step and just asking, what do you see that I can do to make our sex life better? Just ask each other that question. And that's a huge start, because then you'll have some things to go for. And if your spouse says, I don't know, one of the things I use in counseling that's good is, well, if you did know, what would you say?
Okay.
And it's amazing how many times you get a response when you take it just a little bit deeper. And so use that technique. It works good. It helps people kind of, if you don't want to talk, then it kind of go, it makes you think a little bit more. And a lot of times you'll get a good response.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think there's if you didn't hear the episode we did about wives' perspective, which we did, we talked a lot in that about how the women want to feel connected. And I think these questions that you're proposing, Dr. Kim, are very connecting. And so I don't know how it would feel as a guy. I would imagine there's a little bit of vulnerability to have these open-ended questions. It's a little more feelings, but that's exactly what your wife is probably waiting for,
It is. It's being willing to stretch yourself as a guy to connect with her at some point on that level that she is. I don't know if we'll ever get as feeling oriented as our wives in most cases, but the fact that we're trying and we're asking those questions, I think makes a huge difference for our wives. They don't expect you to be her.
No.
They just want you to understand and listen to her.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that intention to understand, and that just demonstrating that you do respect her opinion and that you do value her opinion and her perspective, that's huge. That's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're going to learn something that's going to be helpful.
Yes. Yeah. And both spouses can do this. Both spouses can do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
The next thought we have is from the husbands. Having sex makes me feel closer to my wife. Do you see this in counseling the couples?
Oh, yeah. I think I designed it that way. I mean, I think for a number of reasons. One, I think we like to please our wives. We like to know that that draws them closer to us. But it's also some guys, it's an affirmation that things are okay with us. But you got to then just make sure they are. I've one of my, it's not a favorite story, but it just shows, I think, the picture of it of a couple I work with, and they ended up doing much better. But this was early on, and they'd had a huge fight. And she goes in the bedroom and she locks the door. And about 10 minutes later, he comes busting through the door and he wants to have sex. and she obviously thought, like, kind of, you're thinking, Lindsay, what is wrong with you? But in counseling, what he said was, and helped me see this, is, well, if she has sex with me, it makes me think everything's okay and she's forgiven me. And so it was, so we had a lot of work to do on those things, but I think it does make us feel closer for a number of reasons, and which I think it is what God wired us. I mean, there's just something special that God can do in sex relationship in marriage with a guy and the woman, both of you. And it should make you both feel closer to each other. I think what's designed to. And I think as guys, as we learn more about our wives, the physical is such a part of it early on. I get that, because we're just drive. If we get married young, your hormones are going crazy all the time. But I think it's just as time goes on and you mature, you see that, oh my gosh, there is more to it than the physical. There is the physical's great and I love it, but I also like the closeness I feel, and I like the way she looks at me, and I like the way we cuddle together, and just all those kind of things that sex makes you feel closer to your spouse. Because that's something that the two of you have uniquely. Nobody else has what you have in that. And so it is designed to make you feel closer to that person that God gave you to spend your life with.
Yeah. And that's such a cool part of why we're having this conversation. Like, why it's worth talking about is because God did design that. It does bond you. I mean, it protects the marriage. It fortifies the marriage. It builds up the marriage. And I think we already know, like, most couples don't talk about it. They argue about it, and then they don't really have as much sex. And so I think this is why, like, we're digging in, because it's a really powerful thing. And I think it's been weaponized a lot by the enemy to tear people apart, to pull people away from marriage, from God, to isolate. There's a lot of shame and hurt. And so I think none of that was part of God's plan. I mean, sex was not evil. It's a gift. And so we have to figure out ways to get these conversations going in a way that can draw the couple together. It can get rid of all that shame and bring you back into closeness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's good. I mean, I just think we have to acknowledge that the part of the pain and part of the difficulty is because it's the other side of the power of it. So I'm glad we're talking about that today. So our next thought we have from the husbands. This guy says, turns me on when I please my wife.
Well, I think God designed it that way too. So, I think it is, we just talked a little bit about how there is a lot of pleasure that comes to a guy when he pleases his wife and she's drawn to him and those kind of things. And so, I think that's part of it. And I think that, I've had some couples I've worked with that struggle for sex, and I don't judge why the wife is not able to connect in that, but pretty much she's not very active in the sexual act with her husband. And the difference I see in a guy in that situation, and he may be part of the problem, but that's just the point is, if a wife is not responding as opposed to a husband where the wife is responding because maybe they've talked about their sex life and that they've worked on it together, then that's going to be a connector. That's going to turn you on that you pleased her. That's what you wanted to do. Yeah. And so it goes back to communication and both of you. Okay. If we're not there, if your wife is not responding to you, figure out why. It may be you, maybe not you, maybe something in her past, but help her walk through that and get the help that you need. Maybe it's a Christian counselor. Maybe she was abused when she was younger. Maybe she had a relationship with a guy before marriage that just really hurt her in a way sexually and hurt the way she looks at sex. So help her figure that out. do whatever it takes to help her figure that out, and then begin to build on that together. Don't expect her to go from someone who is very cold during sex to somebody that's just, tearing your clothes off all the time.
Yeah,
no, it's going to be a process, and some of the other things we've talked about. But yeah, that makes so much sense that it is. I mean, I think it just, I don't know, as a guy, you just kind of, maybe it's the Tarzan, you kind of want to beat your chest and go, yeah. I haven't done that. I haven't done that. That's kind of funny. Okay.
I'll leave that to you, Nancy. But I think it is funny because I hope that this guy said this to his wife. That's a great thing to just talk about. But I think there's still a lot of like sort of puritanical ideas that like, you shouldn't enjoy it, or if it's not good, it's just not good. And I don't think that that's valid. I think if it's not good, you should figure out how to make it better. And I think a lot of, and in Christian circles, there was, there's been some misinformation over the years. You've obviously seen a lot more of this than I have, but just kind of the idea that like, no, it's just for, just for the marriage or just for procreation or whatever it is. Don't enjoy it, or men enjoy it, women don't. There's a lot of lies like that have gone around that aren't true. And we need to start figuring out how to move past that.
Yeah. And I think you're right. A lot of them were in the church. I mean, as far as I remember reading some stuff on the Puritans, it was really, you have sex to have children. And so whether they said or not, it's like, okay, doesn't matter if you enjoy it or not, or you don't have to enjoy it. You just need to have some kids. And so that is, when you look at Song of Solomon, that is not what Song of Solomon says. Song of Solomon shows this couple totally and completely enjoying each other. And that, I think, is what the picture God wants us to see on that, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, sometimes the way we can talk about sex or even lust, like if you'll think about just sexual desire, is often termed to be a men's issue. And so I think as a woman, if you have experienced having sexual desire, it's like, well, that's not for women, that's for men. And that can already kind of mess you up and twist things up. And it's like this whole cascade of effects where it's going to bring shame. It's going to divide the couple. And so I think there's a lot where we got to do some work to go into the surface on this. And our next couple episodes do that really well as well. But I think it's something for a couple to talk about.
I think so too. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because the things I mentioned really had to do more with something being done to them. But I think our culture, or the culture you grew up in, or what your parents told you, or what your church told you, has a huge impact on that. And I think some women I know that have done certain things or told them certain things to remain pure till marriage. And then it's like, it takes some while to unravel that and to undo that. I mean, if you told yourself, okay, sex is bad and it's evil and this, even though you're saying that because you want to stay pure till marriage, but you still drag that into marriage. So you've got to turn that, this is a bad thing, and it's oh my gosh, this is a beautiful gift God gave us. And so it takes time to unravel that and to work on that. And again, it's something you can do together. Yeah. And I think for guys, to be patient with your wife if you're in that situation. Be patient, encourage her, walk with her through it, and she'll get there. It's just going to take time, and it will be worth it for both of you and for your sex life together when you do that.
Yeah. And I think just continuing to ask those questions, like, how can I make this feel more safe for you? How can I make you feel more accepted and make this an environment where you feel comfortable?
Yeah. And you may need to ask, if there's really some things there that they heard in church, that may go a little deeper, maybe some conversations with somebody that can help work through those things, just the theological stuff, and just show, no, this is really not that. I know you heard that in your church, but this is what the Bible says about sex. Yeah. And this is God's truth about sex, and just helping her be able to renew her mind in that area.
Yeah. And that's where I found helpful too, like to have friends, like, for me to have women friends, or for Brian to have men friends, just people we can discuss this stuff with, and kind of, because it does take a little while to unpack things that we just assume to be normal if we grew up hearing things, or if we experience things. And so it's hard to figure out sometimes where those things have gotten a grip in your mind. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you can send them this podcast and y'all can start a conversation.
Yeah. No, well, hopefully. Yeah, exactly.
That's good. So when we're talking about the men's feedback, so I will say we got a lot more woman feedback than man feedback. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think a couple
I have a
things.
theory, but I want to hear yours too.
Okay. One, I think as guys, we get complacent, maybe lazy. If we're having sex with our spouse 1 or 2 times a week, a lot of guys are going, that's okay. Our sex life is a 9 or 10, and their wife may rate it a little bit or much lower because there's more to the sexual relationship than the sex act alone. And so I think it can be that guys are, pride keeps us from asking questions about it. I think it's like if things are, we're having sex a couple times a week, that's what kind of what I thought would be at this stage of life. So it's great, you know? So I think as guys, we don't talk about it as easy like that, or maybe we look at it, how we rate it can be different than our wives. And I think that's where the things we're talking about of understanding our wives more and that kind of thing, and where you may be rating it a 9 or 10 now because we're having sex a couple times a week. All of a sudden it's like we're having sex once a week, but we are more connected, and she's enjoying it, and I'm serving her. And what I had before wasn't a 9 or 10, but this is, you know? And so it's just taking time to deal with that. Okay. That's my theory. Now's yours.
Yeah. Well, mine's pretty similar. I think there's just some more hidden pain points for the wives. I think there's like stuff that they can't figure out how to talk about. And so when they get the forum that we ask, it's coming out. And I think for men, I'm just based on like all the things we hear and from conversations, I think the pain point is I want to have it more often, you know? Yeah. Cause even that some of the comments we got weren't like pain points. They were like, I just want to tell her this kind of thing. Yeah. But for the women, and again, go back and listen if you haven't heard that one, but for the women, there was a lot of stuff that's really preventing a lot of them from having a great sex life.
Yeah, absolutely. I always feel like I kind of wish Genesis told us a little more about what their relationship was, Adam and Eve, before the fall. But because my picture is, well, the naked and unashamed anyway. So I would think their sex life was probably pretty active and probably pretty good, you know, just from that. But then when the fall came, it changed that too. So the distortions that we see in other parts of the world and our lives, it certainly had to affect the sex life too. And I would guess that before the fall, that what they were having in the sex life was 100% of what God designed it to be. And so, and I think our goal is to get through all this crud that has happened in our world since the fall to get back to Eden before the fall in our sex life with our spouse. Yeah.
I think that's really good.
You just can't walk around naked all the place everywhere you go now. That part we can't do.
Not everywhere. No, you cannot.
No.
Please.
You're at home, that's one thing, but no, don't go to the garden, whatever.
Nope. But yeah, I do think that's kind of why this conversation is so important, because I think we've alluded to this throughout this whole episode, but everyone has some kind of baggage because of sin, you know, whether it's something done to you, something you were taught, something you've done, etc. It could be anything. We're all coming in with something in the past that has, you know, warped or twisted our perspective. So I mean, I just think it's important for couples to know that, like, you're probably dealing with something, because probably all of us are dealing with something. So don't feel like you're alone. I think that's one of the great ways the enemy loves to twist this, just to say, you're the only one. You can't talk to anybody about this. That's just not true.
No. You know, this, my first psychology class was when I was a freshman undergraduate, and I was in a men's school. So it was all guys in the class. The professor, we spent probably a month on Hugh Hefner's Philosophy of Sex, the guy who created. Yes. Wow. And talk about, at my age at that point, talk about putting a bunch of stuff in my mind that I had to work through. It's crazy. And I think with guys, I think women have things to work through, and I think as guys we do too. And I think porn is a big part of that. We do other podcasts on porn. But all those things are things we've got to work through to push through to get to God's design for sex, because all that stuff gets in our way of that. Yeah. And, you know, the thing is, all that junk, a lot of it is not painful at the beginning, it's painful afterwards. And we don't realize it as we're doing some of those things, how harmful they can be.
Wow, that's so true. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the reason it's worth talking about though is because God can redeem it. So whatever stuff you're bringing in, God can work in that. And I know you've seen that in the counseling room. Absolutely.
I've seen couples with infidelity. I've seen couples with porn addictions. I've seen couples that had done damaging things in their sexual relationship in the past. Totally have God redeemed that and give them something more beautiful than they could even imagine. He just loves us that much,
Yeah.
And always say, I mean, he is just waiting for you to invite him in to say, God, our sex life is a train wreck and we want it to be what you want it to be. What's our first step? Help us. And he will.
Yeah.
He will.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Pray about it. It's not off limits.
No.
You totally can.
At all.
So are there any other big issues or topics that you see often in counseling couples?
Well, looking for things a wife can do for her husband, as much as you enjoy him telling you you're beautiful, we need your affirmations. And that may come as, hey, you look really hot today, or you look great, I love you in a suit, or I love how you work hard for our family, or give him affirmations. And because I think we need it, and it means more to me when Nancy affirms something than anybody else. I mean, somebody can, after a podcast, can they listen to it and send something and say, oh, that was great. You did a great job, blah, blah, blah. Lindsay did that. Awesome. Great. I appreciate that a lot. And I love that. When Nancy said, hey, I listened to that podcast today and that was so good. It's like, oh, wow. Then, my feet are off the floor. I'm just kind of coasting around. So it means so much to us when you affirm us. And so look for opportunities to do that. And even if you're struggling, sometimes just those affirmative words can begin to turn things around just a little bit. I think understanding his needs, we hit on that just a little bit, that a guy's sexual needs were wired differently. And so instead of just saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe I married you, well, guess what? You could have married another one, you'd have the same problem. So it's like listening to his needs too. Why does he want to be with you? Why is it important to him that you have sex more often than you're having now? Talk about together, and then talk about your sex life together. I think that is so important when couples are beginning to do that. And one of the things I do, and I said it before in premarital counseling, I ask a couple each to write down what they look forward to most in the sexual relationship and marriage, and then share that with each other, because I want to begin to talk about it, get it on the table. So maybe your first step is to say, hey, I listened to this podcast today and they talked about how important it is to communicate on your sex life. Let's find a time just to kind of talk about it. And maybe we just kind of see what we like and not like and what would make it better. And let's listen to each other, and then let's make a decision out of that. It'd be a huge step for most couples and could go around a lot, not have to deal with a lot of the problems that could come up if you don't have that conversation.
Right. Yeah. Use the conversation to avoid problems, not just to solve them. Yeah. Yes. And I think too, knowing that conversation, it doesn't have to be the only conversation. You can revisit, check in. How is that working? Is this good? Let's bring it back up.
I would say if you start working on it, I would do it, make some decisions, and then talk about it again in a couple of weeks. Hey, let's talk. How do we do? Okay, man, we're doing really good. I think we're on the right path. Or you may say, well, okay, I thought this is something I wanted in our sex life, but I don't think it really is. Great. That's good information. So I don't keep doing that.
Yeah.
Something that you don't like. And so, it definitely would be an ongoing thing.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good. Take the pressure off. Just get it on the table and you can bring it back around. That's good. So as we're kind of finishing up this conversation, I did have a thought as we're talking about this and looking at the differences of things wives say and things women say, men say. I'm just curious. Do you think men have any idea how much less often women are typically thinking about sex than they are?
I think after you've been married a while, you realize it for sure. But I think when you're dating or when we first married, because pretty much we were on I don't know, but the thought was, but our frequency was pretty much on the same page in early. So no, I think every study I've read from some that I think are extreme, like a guy thinks about sex 900 times a day. I just don't think that.
That's a lot.
Maybe there's somebody, but it's usually everything. Yes, guys think about it probably every day, just depending. And not that means they carry it to the point of just wanting to take their wife and have sex all the time, but the way she looks and that just is a sexual thing to you because you appreciate her beauty and all those kind of things. But I think it's usually men do think about it more. I think it's the way we're wired. I think being visual has a huge part of that. I think about, we can be in that area kind of impulsive. So maybe that's one reason we think about it more. But I think that we just do, and that doesn't make it a right or wrong. I think for a woman, it's to know I'm never going to think about it 50 times a day. But because we're working on our sex life, I want to think about it every couple of days or on the days that we're scheduling sex, because you're thinking about it. And I think for a woman, when a guy thinks about it, even though we know over time you get so much more out of the sexual than the physical, the drive initially, I think, is still the physical because of the attraction. And her wife is beautiful and you want to be with her and you love that closeness that comes with that. And so I think for a woman then to know that, okay, you're not going to probably get turned on by the same things that your husband does. And so that's where it's focusing maybe for you on why you love him and the things you love about him. And God, yes, I can't believe he did that yesterday, but he's such a good husband overall and he's not perfect. And so and you can talk about the physical part of it too, but I think for a woman, it's just how you frame him. Makes it easier to give yourself to him in a very freeing way. And so I think anything that helps you get to that point, in my definition, would be you're thinking about sex because you're doing things to help you frame your husband in the way that you want to be with him when the time comes or when he initiates.
That's good. That's good. That gives us some more things in common.
Does that make sense? Yeah, exactly.
That's good. Did you have anything else on that before we move on?
No, I just think that I think it's just a factor that we have to learn to deal with. And don't think your husband is weird because he thinks about it more. And don't think your wife is weird because she doesn't think about it as much. It goes back to just we're wired. And so it makes us, I think that so much of God has in the sex relationship gives us opportunity to kind of work on things to understand ourselves better, to understand our spouse better. And as we do that in the sex relationship, it's going to bleed over into other areas of our marriage too, because as you work on things. And so, God just so, when you really, even though sometimes you get frustrated or you think, I don't want to work, I wish it would just happen. There's so much wisdom in the way God created us different. And what, as we embrace those differences and see how do we work through that, how do we make the most of those, that you really see God had an amazing plan that we could have never figured out ourselves. We, as guys, we'd taken this short trick. We would have made her sex drive just like our sex drive and we'd ride off in the sunset, together.
Yes.
But God has so much more for us than that. And that's pretty cool when you think about it.
It is. And it is. And that's why it's such an important topic, is because it does point back to really the really clear instruction that God gives us in marriage is that it's a mutual sacrificial love. The way that Christ loves the church was through sacrifice. And so it makes sense that in this topic of sex, there's some differences that we have to lay down and sacrifice our own preference and our own way of doing things, because that is the model of love that Jesus gave us. And so it doesn't really sound as sexy on the front end to talk about, but there's so much gravity and importance to the topic that we can't just take it as just an act separately. I mean, it's designed in this beautiful picture of love. And really all these differences we're talking about are just ways that you can demonstrate, I care enough for you to lay down my preference. I care enough for you to care about your preference, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. It's working together to find what works for the two of you. So don't get in the comparison game. Don't, even though you talk about, you are unique. Certainly don't get into, okay, we watched this in a movie. Well, that's why our sex life should be. No, don't do any of those things. And just design what is it that works best for the two of you, because it's going to be unique and special for the two of you. And that's really cool when you get down to it.
Yeah.
Really cool. Nobody can ever have that. Nobody can ever have what you and Brian have. Nobody can ever have what Nancy and I have. But you can have it and we can have it. And that, to me, that it's just amazing what God has given us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that this conversation has been encouraging and just kind of get some things on the table about what husbands wish their wives knew. But Dr. Kim, do you have any final piece of advice for us?
Well, I think I love these two series that we've done of what wives wish their husbands knew and husbands wish their wives knew. I think the bottom line on both of them, we've had it over and over, is if you haven't had those conversations, start having them and let it be a work in progress. Because I think as you go through different stages of life and different seasons, there's some things that can change. I've got some couples I've worked with that had some health issues. And so we kind of had to learn how to work around those, and just know that it's something that you're probably not going to get it right at 25, and it's going to be the same all the way through. When kids come, there's things that change as you go through different stages, or health problems or anything like that. There's a lot of factors that can change in that. Most of those, or a lot of those, like having kids and little kids and wives being tired and husbands being tired, it's a season. And so how do you make it best during that season? And then how, as you come out of that season, what do you do? So it's once you begin those conversations, you continue to have those with each season, with each challenge that comes up, and you continue to grow together in this. And you see, I see couples now that are enjoying their sex life throughout their entire life. It changes. Sure. Is it different at 95 than it was at 20? Sure. But there's still something great to be given to come out of that. And so, just have the conversation. Start it going. Yeah,
do it. I gave you lots of good conversation starters. Maybe I'll put those in the show notes too, because I do want to make sure to mention before we wrap up this episode, we do write show notes. I write them for every single episode we do so that you have all the resources we mention. You have the transcript available if you'd like to have the transcript. There is also, if you subscribe, you get those show notes delivered straight to your inbox, including special notes, special resources, and questions, application questions, which is where I would write down, for example, all the conversation starters that Dr. Kim gave us. So you have them in one place. Those are available wherever you listen to podcasts. And also the link to subscribe to the podcast email is available wherever you listen to podcasts. So look through to those show notes, click on the link, subscribe, so you get all of that important stuff delivered to you.
Yeah, and I think that's a way. I love that you're doing that, Lindsay, because I think it adds so much. It allows us to take, because a lot of times we listen to something, we think it's great, but we don't really follow up. It's a great way to follow up. And the things we've talked about today, that'll be in the show notes, will be in the questions that you can say, let's go ahead and have that conversation. We've got kind of roadmap here how to do that. So I love that you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So for any episode that's available, so don't miss those. And for next week's episode, I am excited that we're going to get to hear from Dr. Julie Slattery. And she is just a really wise and just a kind voice. And I'm so excited to bring that interview to you. Here's a sneak peek of the conversation that she had with Dr. Kim.
Narratives that the culture has really discipled us in, like, sex is all about personal pleasure and about personal fulfillment and even finding your identity and sexual expression. But then I think there's also an equally destructive narrative that a lot of us grew up in with church culture, which is, God created sex for marriage. And if you've messed that up, you can never fully recover. And the only thing God really cares about is that you obey the rules. That has led to a lot of shame, a lot of confusion, a really simplistic view of what sexual wholeness looks like from God's perspective.
So make sure you're back with us next week for that episode. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.